Okay, we're going to pick up with Chapter 23, Lecture Video C. We're going to pick up with the second part of urine formation. This is the tubular reabsorption and secretion. Okay, so basically what we're doing here is we're going to convert the glomerular filtrate to urine. Now this process involves removing some chemicals and adding some chemicals back into the blood. This occurs from the PCT, which is the proximal convoluted tubule, down to the DCT, which is the distal convoluted tubule. And through this area is where this tubular fluid is actually modified. Now the steps include tubular reabsorption, tubular secretion, and water conservation. So those are the three steps for forming urine. So let's talk about the PCT first. The PCT reabsorbs about 65% of the filtrate. It removes some things from the blood and secretes them into the fluid for disposal into the urine. Now, that's a lot of reabsorption. So the PCT does the majority of reabsorption. Remember, it's long. It has those microvilli, which increase surface area, allow it to do more reabsorption. There's a lot of mitochondria in the PCT to provide the ATP that must be present for active transport. Now, reabsorption, by definition, is the process of reclaiming water and solutes from the tubular fluid and returning them into the blood. So this is, again, where we're trying to concentrate that urine to make sure we're not getting rid of good stuff. There are two routes for reabsorption. You have the transcellular route, which the substances just pass right through the cytoplasm of those epithelial cells on the PCT. And then you have the paracellular route, which is where the substances actually pass in between the PCT cells. And of course it's taken up by the peritubular capillaries. The PCT reabsorbs a greater variety of chemicals than any other part, mainly glucose and amino acids, but you're going to see that other regions like the loop and the distal, the DCT, most of these are only going to deal with either salts or water, and you'll see that in just a second, but the PCT is actually going to reabsorb a variety of other things. Alright, so let's talk about sodium chloride, because sodium reabsorption controls everything. It's the key to everything else. Water, potassium, chloride, all of these ions follow wherever sodium goes. So if you can control sodium, you can control the other ions. It creates an osmotic and electrical gradient that drives the reabsorption of water. It is the most abundant cation, and it creates a really steep concentration gradient, and this of course favors diffusion. Sodium is prevented from accumulating inside of the cell by those sodium-potassium pumps, and you should be familiar with what that does. And again, the negative chloride ions follow that positive sodium because of that positive-negative electrical attraction. The kidneys reduce, they are responsible for reabsorbing water and preventing the body from becoming dehydrated. There's about 180 liters of glomerular filtrate that enter the kidney, and the kidney reduces that to 1 to 2 liters of urine each day. So about 2/3 of the water is reabsorbed by that PCT. Now, this makes reabsorption of the salt and organic makes the cells and the tissue fluid hypertonic. And of course, this allows water to follow those solutes by osmosis. And in that PCT, water is reabsorbed at a pretty constant rate. Now, there is a transport maximum of glucose. This is reached when the transporters are saturated at the membrane. There's only a limited number of transport proteins. Therefore, there's a limit to the amount of solute that the renal tubes can absorb. If all of the transporters are occupied, then the excess solute will pass through the urine. And each solute has its own transport. And you know this. We've talked about transport proteins in 103 and how it gets salts from one side of the cell to the other, and when they're full, they're full. And any excess glucose will be excreted in the urine. This is called glycosuria, which is that excess glucose in the urine. Okay, so now let's talk about tubular secretion. This is the process in the tube that extracts chemicals from the blood and secretes them into the fluid. The two purposes in the PCT and the nephron loop are to remove waste and acid-base balance. This gives you another list of all the waste that are removed. It also, talks about how the kidneys clear the blood blood of pollutants, drugs, hormones, morphine. This is a reason why you have to take prescriptions multiple times a day, because the kidney clears them and it removes that from the blood. It also helps to keep the acid-base balance, and you guys know pH is extremely important in the body fluids and especially in the blood. And so the kidneys secrete hydrogen and bicarbonate, which are buffers that help regulate the pH. The primary function of the nephron loop is to generate a salinity gradient that enables the collecting duct to concentrate urine and conserve water. So electrolyte reabsorption from the filtrate is very, very important. Now remember, the nephron loop is composed of the thick segments and the thin segments. Remember, the thick segments are the ones that reabsorb the salts, sodium, potassium chloride, and the thin segment is going to allow water to penetrate in and out. This tubular fluid is very dilute as it enters into the DCT, because it's gone through the PCT and of course the nephron loop. Fluid that arrives into the DCT still contains about 20% of the water from the filtrate. If all of this were passed as urine, we would be urinating 36 liters a day, and you guys know that is not the case. So we have to reabsorb and conserve some of that water. There are two kinds of cells in the DCT and collecting duct. You have principal cells and intercalated cells. The principal cells are the most numerous. They make up the bulk of the DCT and collecting duct. They have receptors for hormones, so they're going to receive hormones, and they're involved in salt and water balance. The intercalated discs are mainly involved with acid-base balance. Now, the DCT and collecting duct, they reabsorb a lot of water and salt, but they're regulated by hormones. And this is one of the first areas of the kidney we've talked about. It's regulated by hormones. Aldosterone, ANP, ADH, and parathyroid are the four big hormones that act on the DCT and collecting duct. So we're going to quickly talk about those four. Aldosterone is the first one we're going to look at. This is the salt-retaining hormone. It's, of course, secreted by the adrenal cortex, and it's secreted when blood sodium concentration falls, or when potassium concentration rises. This will cause a drop, or if the blood pressure drops, renin's released. That forms angiotensin II, and that stimulates the adrenal cortex to secrete aldosterone. So aldosterone is going to help maintain sodium in the body. It acts on the thick segment of the loop, which that's where salts are more permeable, the DCT, and the collecting duct. And basically it stimulates the reabsorption of more sodium and secretion of potassium. And remember, when we reabsorb more sodium, chloride and water are also going to follow that sodium. So the net effect is really that the body retains sodium chloride and water. Of course, this helps maintain blood volume and pressure. Urine is reduced, and urine has an elevated potassium level. So make sure you know why aldosterone is secreted and what it does. Then you have the ANP. This is secreted by the myocardium of the heart in response to high blood pressure. And there are basically four actions that result in excreting more salt and water in the urine, which reduces blood volume and blood pressure. So urination is going to increase. It dilates the afferent arteriole and constricts the efferent, which increases the filtration rate. It inhibits renin and aldosterone. It inhibits the secretion of antidiuretic, and it inhibits sodium chloride from being reabsorbed. So basically we're doing the opposite of what the aldosterone hormone does. And then you have the antidiuretic, which is secreted by the pituitary. This is your ADH. Of course, this is in response to dehydration, and this is going to, of course, allow the body to conserve more water. This makes the collecting duct more permeable to water, and water can actually re-enter the fluid instead of being lost in urine. So this prevents you from getting, or helps with dehydration. And then you have parathyroid. They are secreted by the parathyroid glands in a response to calcium deficiency. So when calcium levels get too low, the PTH is secreted. It acts on the PCT to increase phosphate excretion. It also acts on the thick segment of the loop and the DCT to increase calcium reabsorption. So basically we have to lower the amount of calcium content in the urine. And again, this acts on the DCT and collecting duct. So just a summary of reabsorption and secretion. The PC2 reabsorbs almost a third of the filtrate and returns it to the capillaries. A lot of that's linked to active transport of sodium. Remember, sodium's the big thing. Everybody follows sodium. The nephron loop reabsorbs another 25% of the filtrate. The DCT reabsorbs sodium, chlorine, and water, mainly under hormonal control, especially aldosterone and ANP. The tubes also extract drugs, waste, and solutes from the blood and put it back into the tube fluid. And the collecting duct conserves water. The DCT completes that process by determining the chemical composition of urine. So it's going to really make sure that, the amount of salts in the urine is appropriate. All right, that concludes Lecture C, and we'll finish up with the chapter in Video D.